Welcome. Today we are going to have a presentation on the emotional intelligence, focusing on re-engaging emotion in a emotionally confusing world. My name is Ashley Middich. I am a professor at Judson University, and I also do private practice work at Goodings Grove in New Lenox. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this webinar. I look forward to sharing some of the information that I have experienced as being a clinician and as an instructor, and also some of the research I have done focusing on the importance of emotions as we go through defining emotions, looking to see how we learn about emotions, how emotions impact our life cycles, how emotions vary across genders, what are ways that we can express emotions, and hopefully throughout hearing all of these different scenarios as they relate to emotions, you have some great ideas that you can utilize in your life and in your work with your clients. So to get started, the one thing that all people have in common is the expression of emotion. But where do we learn about this emotion? People often struggle defining the emotion they are feeling and how to work through that feeling. Even as clinicians and educators, we focus a lot on theory, but we don't focus as much on emotion. This workshop is going to teach you about emotion, synonyms of emotion, and how to express those emotions in a healthy way. The first half was going to focus mainly on emotional education. The second half will focus more on how to re-engage the emotion and how to teach people about emotional regulation. So talk to me about emotions. Human emotions are feelings that inform a person's subjective experience, their decision-making, and their mental health. Our genes can influence how we view emotional resilience and sensitivity to emotional information. Our personal values inform emotional reactions, making you feel positive emotions and negative emotions. Our emotional state can vary daily and even hour to hour. So, specific emotional experiences may trigger psychological and physiological responses. These include an increased heart rate, the movement of facial muscles, or significantly impact a person's overall well-being. So some of you might be aware of a Disney movie called Inside Out. Several years ago, they created a Pixar Disney movie with the characters you see pictured here. The main characters are showing the green is disgust. Our purple character is fear. The blue-haired girl is joy. The fully blue character is sadness, and the red character is anger. So the premise of this movie, if you're not familiar, is that there is a young girl named Riley, and she has these emotions in her head. And so these characters are in her head, and she's learning how to navigate these emotions. Now, we are going to see here in a few months in June, there's going to be an Inside Out 2, where they decided to add additional characters such as emotions. It's still using Riley, but now Riley is a teenager. And some of the emotions that they're going to be experiencing in that movie include embarrassment, ennui, anxiety, and envy. Now, if you're not familiar, ennui is another term for being bored. So these are some of the core emotions that are used within the movie Inside Out. We're going to use some of those throughout this presentation. However, there are 8 core emotions that we experience as humans. The first one that we are going to focus on is the emotion of anger. Thinking about how you define anger. A lot of times we will notice that anger is a strong feeling of displeasure, It is defined as a natural and adaptive emotion that arises in response to perceived threats, injustices, frustrations. It's characterized by feelings of displeasure, irritation, hostility. Um, a lot of times, these anger emotions come out because it is alerting a person to a threat. Boundaries have been crossed. They're trying to prepare for action, either to confront the threat or to defend themselves. Another reason people often experience anger is because it's mobilizing energy. So, our anger is expressed through physiological changes, such as an increased heart rate, adrenaline, muscle tension. The surge of this energy can assert or create defensive responses to that threat. Anger is also used to express displeasure. Anger communicates to others what something is wrong. Anger can motivate change. So, if we're looking to address an injustice, correct a wrong, make changes within a relationship or an environment to solve problems. Anger can be experienced because of a self-defense. So a person is feeling threatened and their defense mechanisms become expressed. While anger can serve many adaptive functions, it also can turn out to be very problematic, especially when it's in excessive use. It can be uncontrolled or it's not expressed appropriately. When a person has chronic or unmanaged anger, this can lead to very negative consequences to physical health, mental well being, and relationships. Surprise. Surprise is defined often by an attack made without warning, a feeling caused by something unexpected or unusual. Now, a surprise can often be viewed as a good thing. You show up and somebody has a surprise gift for you or a surprise party. But surprise can also be something that is scary and something we're not prepared for. So, our feelings of surprise often come into place because of something abrupt happened. It happened without warning, catching us off guard. Surprise is often a physiological response. Again, our eyes widen, our heart rate rises, we have a heightened arousal. Oftentimes, our sympathetic nervous system is in place and we are in a fight or flight mode. Surprise shows some level of cognitive processing and the ability to make some sense of that unexpected event or stimulus. So there is a rapid appraisal and evaluation of the situation to see what is taking place. Surprise is often a subjective experience, accompanied by astonishment, bewilderment. People, again, might feel happy about the surprise. Other times, a surprise can be a scary thing. Behavioral responses to surprise. A person might freeze, they might feel startled and jump, they might gasp, yell, scream. But often surprises are very short lived. They're a brief period of that unexpected experience. And so, quickly as our cognitive processes jump in, we are able to make a decision about what is taking place and move into our next emotion. The third emotion we're going to talk about is that of shame. Shame is a painful emotion caused by consciousness of guilt, shortcomings. It's often a condition of humiliating disgrace. Oftentimes, people are feeling embarrassed when they feel shame. They feel shame because they have regret or remorse. Now, shame and guilt are different. Unlike guilt, which focuses on specific behaviors and actions, shame is focused more on a person's self. What is wrong with them? How are they flawed, inadequate, or unworthy? So, shame is self focused, it's centered on the negative beliefs that we have about ourselves. Shame is often a social comparison, comparing ourselves to other people to see where we have fallen short. Shame is related to people often becoming avoidant, withdrawing from situations because they don't feel worthy enough to be in those situations. It has a very pervasive impact. Shame attacks a person's self-esteem and wears away at a person's self-confidence. Just like the other emotions we've talked about so far, shame also has a physiological response, which includes stress, heart rate increase, sweating, muscle tension. Shame is also dependent upon cultural norms. So, different social expectations based on cultural values may see a person reacting to things in a shameful way different than others. Shame can be something that we use as a healing and growth opportunity for self awareness, motivation, and goal setting. Our next emotion we are going to discuss is that of sadness, which is defined as an effect with or expressive of grief and unhappiness. Sadness is common. It's a very a universal emotion, feelings of sorrow, unhappiness, and melancholy. It typically happens when there are losses, disappointments, and adverse circumstances. Sadness is a signal of a loss or of that of a disappointment. Some sort of undesirable or distressing event has occurred. Sadness facilitates processing and coping. A lot of people spend time in reflection, introspection, and acceptance of these difficult realities, which promotes social connection. A lot of times when people are experiencing sadness, social support steps in. We seek comfort from people, empathy and understanding from friends, family, and peers. We share these experiences with others in order to foster that empathy, validation, and emotional intimacy with people. Other times, sadness can cause us to feel motivated to withdraw or rest. We pull away from activities. We prioritize self care and rest. This self regulatory function allows us to conserve energy and replenish resources and engage in activities that promote self well being and recovery. Sadness fosters empathy and compassion. A lot of times when we go through sad things, we need the support of other people who are either suffering with us or can support us because of their desire to provide empathy, understanding, and altruism. Sadness can cause encouraging reflection and growth. Having personal growth and reflection in one's life, focusing on challenges and adversities, can help us to become resilient, wise, and provide psychological growth over time. While sadness is a very normal and adaptive emotion, a long, prolonged amount can cause clinical depression and other mental health concerns. We need to be mindful of the duration of this sadness for that specific reason. Next is fear, which is an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. So things like threats or harm to ourselves often cause us to feel fearful. The psychological response, which with fear, again, is heart rate, rapid breathing, muscle tension, heightened arousal, and sweating. The cognitive ability to process fear often comes in, appraises, and evaluates those threats. We determine how significant those threats are and what to do from there. The emotional experience from fear is often related to apprehension, dread, anxiety, or panic. These emotional responses can often vary in intensity, duration, and subjective distress, depending on people's past experiences that are stored and reminding them as a trigger. The behavioral responses of fear often come from the fight or flight. So if we are doing the flight, we are fleeing from danger. If we are doing fight, we are confronting the threat. Sometimes people often freeze in that moment and don't know what to do. In order to cope with fear, it is very good to have a cognitive appraisal and using relaxation techniques in problem solving. Some people do have an ability to have a learned fear that is gained from a direct experience, such as a traumatic event, or an indirect experience, such as observational learning or a social transmission. This fear here is ingrained through some sort of conditioning process and is often how people develop phobias. Other people do have what we call maladaptive fear, which is an excessive or irrational fear. When those become too intense, a person becomes maladaptive. Phobias, anxiety disorders, panic disorders are often characterized by persistent maladaptive fear responses. Our next emotion is disgust, which is marked aversion aroused by something highly distasteful. Here, a physiological response can be nausea, gagging, vomiting, increased heart rate. The evolutionary function of disgust was to keep people from ingesting or coming in contact with harmful or contaminated substances. So, exposure to pathogens, spoiled food, body fluids, or other things will cause infection or disease. We now have adapted and included social and moral disgust, where people avoid physical contamination. This disgust focuses solely on social and moral functions. Individuals may experience disgust in response to violations of social norms, moral principles, or ethical standards. We often have learned associations with disgust. We have specific stimuli or contexts that we find disgusting or offensive. Our cognitive appraisal of disgust often looks at things by using our sensory characteristics. So, having something smell funny or have a slimy texture can provide us knowing that something is not very distasteful. Behavioral avoidance when things are disgusting is often when we try to minimize that contact. Emotional responses, when we are feeling that feeling of disgust, we often have feelings of aversion. Now, overall, disgust plays a vital role in protecting individuals from harm, promoting hygiene and social order. It helps shape cultural norms and values. And while it can be adaptive in certain contexts, excessive or irrational disgust can contribute to different anxiety disorders. Next is the emotion of interest, which is a feeling that accompanies or causes special attention to something or somebody. This is often viewed as a positive emotion. We characterize this by feelings of curiosity, engagement, and attraction towards a particular object, activity, or topic. Through curiosity and exploration, people have a desire to explore and learn about novel and unfamiliar items. We provide attention and engagement in order to see how long an item keeps our interests. There's intrinsic motivation to engage in activities or pursuit of inherent enjoyment. Our personal relevance arises when there is some sort of connection to the subject matter or activity. When something aligns with values, goals, and interests, people are more likely to feel engaged, motivated, and invested. Now, interest changes and is very variable among individual differences. This can be based on intellectual pursuits, artistic endeavors, athletic activities, social interactions. And because it is often seen as a positive emotion, people often experience enjoyment, satisfaction, and approval. Interest also allows us to be able to learn and provide skill development. When individuals are interested in a topic, they are more likely to seek out opportunities to learn, practice, and master. It includes sustained engagement. People like to pursue something that is interesting persistently and face the challenges or setbacks driven by a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Our next emotion is joy, the emotion evoked by well being, success, or good fortune, or the prospect of possessing what one desires. This is another positive emotion where we see feelings of happiness and delight. There's an intense positive emotion. Joy shows happiness, pleasure, fulfillment, and it is associated with a sense of warm lightness and expansiveness in the mind and body. It can be spontaneous, smiles, laughter, tears, happiness, and other outward displays of emotion. It shows connection and gratitude toward others, the world, higher powers, a sense of self being and well being, the overall well being of life and satisfaction. It provides meaning and significance, deep meaning and significance with individuals, people who have similar goals and nurturing relationships. It's a transcendent sense of self, noticing that people and connections are greater than themselves. It is a cultivation of appreciation through intentional practices such as mindfulness, gratitude. And it is also having its social and cultural influences. Celebrations and rituals, such as shared cultural events, can often serve as opportunities to collectively have expressions of joy and common bonding. So those are our 8 core emotions. Now, as you heard me talk about those emotions and you see the words written on the screen, there might be other things that came to your mind, other synonyms of what that word might mean to you. It might have made you think about different experiences that you had. You might have started to have some of those physiological moments. You might have had your heart race. You might have smiled. But I would just want to give some examples of some synonyms that we have for some of these other so these emotions. So this here is an emotion and feeling wheel. They do only have 6 of those emotions, but as I looked up the dictionary definition of these emotions, there were many synonyms. Anger has columns and columns, things like outrage, fury, wrath, mood, irritation, annoyance, temper, grudge, envy, lividity, outbursts. There's so many. And as you see, even in this wheel, there are multiple layers that go from anger and showing other emotions that can be synonyms. Synonyms of surprise, shock, revelation, jaw dropper, wonder, twist, amazement, dismay, attack, capture, charge. You see some of those being positive, some of those being more negative. Shame, remorse, regret, grief, sorrow, blame, anguish, fault, distress, scorn, humbling, reproach, stigma, dishonor, sadness, things like unhappy, heartbroken, depressed, melancholy, upset, disappointed, hopelessness, gloomy, downcast, joyless, fear, anxiety, dread, panic, fright, worry, alarm, jitters, funk, fearfulness, apprehension, nervousness, disgust, distaste, hatred, nausea, revulsion, repulsion, loathing, dislike, disliking, joy, happiness, bliss, joyfulness, enjoyment, pleasure, delight, ecstasy, warm fuzzies, cheerfulness, comfort, nirvana, heaven, paradise. So, based on these emotions, I've kind of come up with a way to think about how these emotions impact us. I'm sure you've all heard that we need 5 positive things for every 1 negative thing that we experience in our life to basically continue to fill our emotional bank account. So if you've ever played ping pong or pinball, I'm sorry. So if here's a pinball machine, you launch the ball and there's all these spots that the ball bounces off of to get points within the game. So if we put our 8 core emotions in the pinball machine, and every day we wake up and we launch that ball, and the ball bounces around in the pinball machine all day, hitting all of those different areas. Do you think that a person is going to end up with a positive score or a negative score? Let's say all of those positive emotions give positive points. So, joy, the synonyms that go with joy, uh, interest, and the synonyms that go with interest, surprise, the positive aspects of surprise. So, of those eight, 2.5 of those emotions are going to give positive points. So, we basically are going to have those emotions and any of their synonyms in here as 2.5 of the areas the ball can bounce off of. The other emotions are going to take points away. So, the scary part of surprise, anger, disgust, fear, sadness, shame. So, as the ball is bouncing around in there every day, a person is more likely to have those negative points. So, negative points, plus we are looking at the fact that we need to have 5 positive experiences for every one negative. It really makes you wonder how people are able to go through and feel fulfilled emotionally without having to feel all those negative emotions all the time. And so, one of the things I want to focus on is not that those negative emotions are necessarily bad, but what are the ways that people can process those emotions so they're not getting those negative points? So, one thing I wanted to share with you here too is that a lot of times our feelings are expressions of what is going on inside our body. So if a person is feeling sad, they might feel like they need to cry. If a person is feeling lonely, they might feel the need to be connected. If a first person feels shame, they might be telling someone that I need self-compassion. If a person is feeling resentment, they might be saying that they need to forgive. If a person is feeling empty, they might feel that they need to be creative. If a person is feeling angry, they might need to check in with their boundaries. If a person is feeling anxious, they might need to breathe. And stress might be telling a person to take one step at a time. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about the history of emotion. Where does it come from? Well, if we think about things over the course of history, we focus on emotion and the complexity of it from a psychological, a philosophical, sociological, anthropology, and neuroscience. So, in the ancient views of emotion, people back in Greece and Rome, India, and China, emotions were tied to the gods or spirits and were very subjective to divine influence. Philosophers like Aristotle and Plato offered early theories about emotions and considered them as essential components to human nature. As we moved into the medieval times and the Renaissance period, emotions during those Middle Ages were viewed through the lens of Christianity, with emotions like love, fear, and anger. They were being interpreted in terms of moral and theological contexts. During the Renaissance, there was a revival of interest in human emotions. Rene Descartes explored the nature of emotion and their relationship to reason. Then we moved into the Enlightenment and the Romanticism period. There was a shift of thinking about emotions, like Immanuel Kant, emphasizing the importance of reason over emotion. However, in the Romantic movement, this challenged the perspective of celebrating emotion and individual expression, leading to renewed interest in a subjective experience of emotions. The 19th and 20th century psychology began to study the emergence of emotions through the psychological lens. Early psychologists like Carl Jung developed theories about the nature and function of emotions, laying that groundwork. Freud also made significant contributions to the understanding of emotions through his psychoanalytic theory. Today, in our modern perspective, in the 20th and 21st centuries, research on emotions and across different disciplines, we look at emotion from the neuroscience, sociology, anthropology. We use technology such as brain imaging to allow the study of neural mechanisms and the underlying emotions that come with that. Overall, the history of emotions reflects the changing attitudes and perspectives toward a fundamental aspect of human psychology, from ancient religious interpretations to modern scientific inquiries. Emotions continue to be rich in an area of study that intersects with various fields of inquiry, shaping our understanding of human behavior and subjective experience. So, how do we learn about emotions? We learn about emotions based on psychological research, nature versus nurture, expression, development, the impact of behavior, using experimental surveys, observations, and clinical studies. We use the neuroscientific studies to look at brain imaging through MRIs and PET scans. We look at emotional processing and the brain's role in emotional functioning. We use physiological inquiry. We look at ethical and moral beliefs of different cultures and different places around the world to see what are the philosophical debates and often the center issues, such as the relationship between emotion and decision making. We have clinical psychology and psychiatry studying the emotion and its effects on depression, anxiety, and trauma related conditions. We have developmental studies that view how emotions develop and change across the lifespan. And we also use the literature arts, things like literary works, films, paintings, and music can deepen our understanding of the complexity of one's emotional life, providing insights that complement scientific research. We learn about emotion from people. Who taught us about emotion? Our parents, our friends, our teachers, our life experiences. And as Inside Out uses the core memory balls within Riley's brain, we do the same thing. We take in information and we put those ideas and concepts into understanding and practice. If we are assimilating the new experiences, we put them into the areas that align with our other ideas that we already knew. If we are modifying our beliefs based on new or completely different concepts, we may accommodate that information as we store it in our brain. Our brain plays a really significant role when it comes to emotions. Emotions play the fundamental role in shaping the functioning of our brains, influencing various cognitive processes, decision-making, behavior, and overall well-being. Emotion in our brain impacts our limbic system. As we talked about, their physiological responses to the emotions that we experience. Parts of our brain, including the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, they all play roles in emotional processing, memory formation, and the regulation of those physiological responses. Our neurotransmitters in our brain release neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. These neurotransmitters modulate our mood, arousal, and motivation to show how we feel in response to an emotional stimuli. Our cognitive processing allows us to have attention, perception, memory, and decision making. Those emotional stimuli capture our attention more readily than neutral stimuli. Our memory plays a critical role in memory formation. Emotional events are more likely to be remembered than neutral events. The regulation of our stress response provided through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Our chronic stress and dysregulated emotional response can lead to alterations in our brain structure, increasing the risks for mental health disorders such as anxiety and depression. Our social and interpersonal processing of how we understand, perceive, and respond to other people's emotions allow us to empathize or mirror the emotional states of another person. Our behavioral response is how we respond to our environmental stimuli, motivating the approach or avoidance behaviors based on the perceived emotional cues. The regulation and modulation performed in the prefrontal cortex allows us to regulate our emotional responses. These regions exert a top-down control over our limbic structures, enabling our cognitive ability to regulate strategies and have emotional flexibility. Our brain is also in charge of our unconscious emotion. We can experience unconscious emotions because those thoughts, behaviors, and interactions might have not experienced that explicit awareness. Our unconscious emotions are related to our automatic emotional response. So, how we unconsciously respond to stimuli such as threat or danger. Those are those things that sometimes you feel like I didn't even get a chance to process what took place. My mind, my body, the words that came out of my mouth didn't even think about, it just naturally came out. We have our implicit associations. So the stimuli and the emotional response that occur, these repeated experiences provide social conditioning. Our emotional priming is exposure to happy or sad images and how we elicit corresponding emotional states. Our nonverbal communication, such as our facial expressions, body language, and vocal tone. Our defense mechanisms protect us from experiencing distressing or threatening emotions. Our implicit memory is the ability to involve the unconscious recollection and influence of past emotional experiences. Our subliminal processing is the stimuli that are present below the threshold of the conscious awareness. These subliminal emotional processes can elicit emotional responses without an individual consciously perceiving the stimuli. Our emotion and memory, the way that we remember the things that go through our experiences. Sometimes smelling a certain scent brings us back to a certain memory. Hearing a song can do the same thing. So our memory of emotions is based on encoding. So by encoding memories, we increase that attention and that arousal. So using the inside out, the little balls in Riley's memory, they're encoding in her brain those pieces of experience to remember what has taken place. Eventually, there's not enough room, so we have to do some consolidation. So memories get consolidated in the hippocampus and sometimes form new memories and spaces for new memories. Our memory retrieval often takes place because emotional states and contexts are associated with an ability to recall, leading an emotional memory being more vividly and readily remembered. We sometimes have what we call flashbulb memories. So these are intensely emotional events, such as traumatic experiences, highly detailed and vivid memories of an event and the surrounding circumstances. Our brain and our memory helps us with emotional regulation. The regulation of emotions can impact how we process our memory. Strategies such as suppression of emotional responses can influence how information is encoded, consolidated, and retrieved. That is why sometimes there might be situations that our brain protects us from that we don't recall or remember. Our emotion and semantic memory are also influenced and encompassed with the general knowledge and facts. Emotionally charged information tends to be remembered better than neutral information, leading to enhanced encoding and retention of emotionally relevant knowledge. Our autobiographical memory often is the memory of personal experiences and events from our own life. Emotionally significant events can be remembered more vividly and accurately than neutral ones, which contributes to the formation of coherent autobiographical narratives. So, a lot of times we in our field are focusing on the aspect of empathy and the role that emotion plays with empathy. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the role that empathy plays with emotions. Emotional contagion. This is our response when individuals unconsciously mimic the emotions of other people. This is sometimes those natural reactions. If you see somebody cry, you may start to cry as well. You start to feel their pain that they're experiencing. Emotional recognition is when we recognize and are able to interpret the emotional cues of others. This is really important for us in our field. Emotional perspective taking. Sometimes we don't have the ability to understand what a person is going through because we haven't been through something like that. But we are able to adopt emotional perspectives from another person. So we might not have the same experience as them, but we've had similar emotions. So we can relate to them and be empathetic in that instance. Our empathetic concern, so showing things like compassion, sympathy, um, our emotional regulation, so how we regulate the emotions that we feel around other people, and can sometimes be supportive to other people in that sense. We have emotional resonance. And this is where we can experience resonance with other people and share that deep emotional connection. Sometimes it is through emotions that we create our most meaningful relationships with people. Our emotional feedback loop is a reciprocal emotional exchange between individuals. Each person's emotional response influences and shapes the others. The emotional feedback loop fosters mutual understanding, empathy, and relational closeness, and contributes to the development of supportive and empathetic social networks. You've heard me talk a bit about emotional regulation and what that means in the past, few slides. We're going to spend some more time talking about how emotional regulation and its ability to exert control over one's emotional state. In general, it basically includes behaviors such as rethinking a challenging situation so that we can reduce some of those strong negative emotions and we can figure out how to keep them in a more optimistic and positive mindset. So it's not so much the idea of being angry is bad, being sad is bad. You can't experience those emotions. But when we can emotionally regulate those 8 core emotions along with the synonyms of those emotions, we are not suppressing any of that information. Instead, we are making sure that we project it in a healthy way. So the first step is to think about the awareness and identification of what is taking place. So as that emotion comes into our bodies and our minds, what are we recognizing about it? Staying attuned to it. What has triggered us? Then understanding and accepting it. So what caused that feeling? What are the underlying causes? Were we triggered by a previous thing? Do we have a certain emotional experience that we were hoping for? Is an expectation not being met? So after we understand, identify, and accept those emotions, we can move into the ability to modulate and control them. We think about their level of intensity. So, when anger results in breaking something, throwing something. That is not the ability to control it. That is when anger is out of control. But knowing that being angry about a situation is not a bad thing. We'll notice also that there is flexibility and adaptability in how we respond to these situations. It's not like when you're angry, there's only one positive thing that you can do to express that emotion. There are multiple ways depending on the person and the scenario. We will look at social and contextual factors, the social norms, social support, and interpersonal dynamics, and what roles they play in that emotional regulation. We have to consider developmentally where a person is. We often get frustrated with children because of how they respond in situations. They have big emotions and don't really understand what those mean. Their feelings of anger are not the same as our feelings of anger. Their brains are not developed enough to be able to understand why they're angry, why they're sad. That's why a lot of times children struggle being able to talk about why they behave the way that they do. And we have to think about different individual differences, things like personality traits, genetic predispositions, and temperament, and how those impact the ability to understand, accept, control, and be flexible with how we express those emotions. So, one of the great ways to think about how we are going to express our emotions or think about our emotions is using the idea of rain. So, the R of rain, recognize what emotion are you feeling? A, accept, actually give a statement of acceptance. I, investigate. Why do you feel this way? N, nurture. How can you cope? So, by regulating, we are going to look at how we can identify and reduce triggers. There might be a past experience where we haven't forgiven somebody or forgiven ourselves. And so, in those situations, new things can come along and cause a person to be triggered. So, the event that is taking place might not be that significant, but because it brings back memories of a past thing, it puts it basically under a magnifying glass and makes it a lot larger than it should be. We want to pay attention to the physical symptoms. Having an increased heart rate and raising blood pressure. We don't want those things to get out of control. Consider the story you're telling yourself. So, a lot of times when we're experiencing a heightened emotion, we're not necessarily thinking rationally. So, think about all the different, basically, key witnesses that might look at the story and think about how they were viewed. Engage in positive self talk. A lot of times our go-to is to go to people don't like me, I'm not good at something, thinking about the worst case scenario. So it's important in these situations to be positive as we think about what is going on. Number 5, make a choice about how to respond. This is really important. And so based on how we've learned about emotions, some people were raised that, you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't yell, you shouldn't be angry, you shouldn't experience those emotions. So they've been repressed. Some people have witnessed or experienced a person that when they get really angry, they get very abusive or they throw things and damage things. Thinking about how to respond to an emotion along a continuum from extremely unhealthy to healthy. What are some of the things, if you were to put those choices about how to respond, where would your response fall? If it falls in the more negative, unhealthy way, that's not the way we want to exhibit that emotion. We want to be on the lookout for those positive emotions and positive ways to express the emotions that we're experiencing. So I mentioned the emotional spectrum. Right now, I'm showing you a screen that shows an emotional spectrum. And you see two different spectrums here. An emotional spectrum refers to a range or continuum of emotions from happy to sad. Now, sometimes we know people or we are the person that when we're extremely happy, we're extremely, extremely happy. And when we're mad, we're really mad. Other people, when they're happy, you may not know it. When they're mad, you may not know it. And so if you think about a person's emotional spectrum and you look at these red waves here, a person's spectrum is going to vary. And sometimes this can lead to miscommunications among people. So if I'm a person that is trying to get a happy, excited response out of somebody because I gave them a gift, and I'm a big, highly spectrumed person, I'm going to expect this person to respond in a way that is like super elated and excited. But if they don't have a large emotional spectrum like the one on the bottom, They may just be slightly happy, but to them, that's fully happy. And I might gauge that as they're underappreciative or that they didn't like something. But we have to take into consideration where a person's emotional spectrum is and how strongly they are going to experience that emotion. So here's another way to kind of look at that in terms of levels of emotion. Some people only get to +1, -1. Some people get to +2, -2. Some people get to +3, -3. So as you think about now where you fall in your emotional spectrum, where your significant other falls, where your child falls, the people that are close to you, keeping that emotional spectrum in the back of your head is really significant so that you aren't projecting your emotional spectrum onto somebody else. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of healthy versus unhealthy emotion. I want to make it clear that all emotions can be healthy and all emotions can be unhealthy. It's all about the extent into how you express those emotions. We talked earlier about the ping pong balls or in the pinball machine and how we can get negative emotions and positive emotions and how many points that we can get. Now, just because an emotion is negative doesn't mean that it's unhealthy. What it means is that we're being real. We're being aware of what is going in our life. So now we're going to spend that time talking about how to express those emotions in a healthy way, even though they may be negative. So we started talking already about that awareness and acceptance, making sure that we're not pushing away a negative emotion because we think negative is unhealthy. We can express that negative emotion in a positive way. Effective communication is huge here. So I read to you earlier in the presentation all these different synonyms for the emotions that we're experiencing. We don't go around teaching people the Webster Dictionary definition of what an emotion is. Essentially, it is a behavior that's exhibited when we're a child and somebody telling us what it is. And so we start to use that assimilation and accommodation to store memories and events in our life for how we define that emotion. So, where this becomes a major problem with communication is that let's say I say to you, man, I'm feeling really sad today. You're going to take your interpretation of what sad means and you're going to think, okay, that's what she must be feeling. But my experience with sad might be different than yours. So when we talk about effective communication, it's important when we tell a person, I'm angry, I'm sad, I was surprised, that we also elaborate on that so that a person understands what we mean, giving a concrete definition on what we mean when we say a certain emotion. And that is really important now to be the person listening, to be actively listening, not interrupting, not jumping to conclusions, but listening and thinking about, okay, when this person tells me that they're angry with me, what do they mean by angry? And so, by having effective communication and great active listening, we are able to have a level of emotional regulation. We can have a deep connection with a person so that they see this is what I am feeling and this is what I need from you. And this provides us with the ability to have a healthy expression of that emotion by having that communication instead of the assumption that often comes with the conversation with emotion. And then it just snowballs because people get more and more upset with each other. If there's not people around, it's important to have healthy outlets. So, what do you enjoy to do? Do you like drawing? Do you like playing music? Do you like singing? Do you like reading? So if it's not about being with another person and talking with another person, when you're angry, what is something that you can do that is going to make you feel better, that is healthy? It's important to have those levels of boundaries as well. We really struggle to say no to people. And so when we're feeling a certain emotion, um, or when we don't have that emotion yet and we're not learning to say no, and so we get overwhelmed and we get frustrated and then we get angry or sad or surprised. Sometimes we create those negative emotions because we don't have good self-care and boundaries. It's also good to have healthy emotions in terms of problem solving. Some people shut down when they're feeling those negative emotions. They don't want to process them, they don't know what to do with them, they just give up. They maybe want to eat, maybe they want to sleep. And so, those are unhealthy ways to express those negative emotions. Instead, thinking about, okay, I can't change what is going on, but what I can do is think about ways to move forward. So, using some of those problem solving skills to break it down into manageable steps and seek solutions to figure out how to get yourself in a better place. The ability to seek support, having people that you trust that you can talk to, friends, family, your therapist, to cultivate that empathy. Give yourself empathy. Recognize that we all experience emotions differently and how we respond. We are really good at expecting people to do what we would do, and that often causes a lot of conflict amongst people. So, being more open to going deeper, to asking people what they mean by that, and to also have self compassion with yourself. Especially if you've grown up learning that you shouldn't cry, that you shouldn't be afraid. Sometimes it's really hard to realize that it's okay. It's okay to show emotion. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. The only time that it's bad is when you're being unhealthy. So what does unhealthy look like? Unhealthy looks like repressed emotions. It's feelings or reactions to an individually, consciously or unconsciously suppressing or pushing them down into the subconscious mind instead of dealing with them. This repression often happens because of societal norms, fear of judgment, trauma, or discomfort with emotions. Repressed emotions don't disappear. They come out in physical symptoms like headaches and stomach aches, as psychological issues such as anxiety or depression, behavioral patterns like aggression or withdrawal. Those psychological theories suggest that those repressed emotions have long term effects on a person's mental health and well being. So, through therapy and other forms of emotional processing and regulation, people can identify and address those emotions and move from being unhealthy to healthy. So, if you feel anxious, that unmet need might be safety, security, or stability. If you feel resentful, you might want to feel heard, understood, or noticed. If you feel numb, you might need to feel supported, safe, and loved. If you feel overwhelmed, you might be looking to have space, support, or me time. If you feel disconnected, you might feel that you need to be noticed, loved, or prioritized. If you feel distrust, you may be looking for honesty, openness, or loyalty. If you're feeling stressed, you need to prioritize yourself and self care. So, learning to create that emotional safety. As I mentioned already, it's important to listen actively and tentatively. No distraction, good eye contact, no interruptions. Approach conversations from a place of curiosity instead of judgment. Don't ask questions by interrogating somebody, but instead ask questions in terms of, I'm curious. I'd like to know more about something. Make the agreement that what is shared in the conversation will not be used as retaliation at another time. Lead with empathy and compassion and consider if someone is being reactive in a conversation due to an internal trigger. Don't let their trigger you. Offer validation through statements that let your loved one know that you recognize their point of view. You don't necessarily have to say that you agree with it, you don't have to believe it, but let them know that you understand their view. Prioritize emotional safety over problem resolution. Maybe the conversation needs to calm down before the conversation can keep going. Part of having good emotional regulation is also choosing safe people. Safe people listen and ask questions. They're compassionate. They've earned trust. They respond to feelings and respect boundaries. They're open to feedback. They're willing to grow. They're vulnerable and open with you. They tend to be stable and steady. They apologize if needed. They show compassion. They may change behavior based on their own experiences. They're open, they communicate, and they're honest. Our unsafe people tend to be self focused, judgmental. They demand trust. They lack empathy. They push boundaries. They are defensive. They don't have any growth. They're stagnant. They hide their weaknesses. They can be unstable or inconsistent. They don't always apologize. They often lack compassion and don't work on themselves. They withdraw from connection. They may lie or gaslight you. In experience two, we've been using the idea of the topic of, let's say, sadness or anger. And anger, I think, is a really good one that to focus on in terms of creating limits. Looking at even what is a healthy way to express and what is an unhealthy way to express. As we can think about here and brainstorm a little bit, unhealthy anger is destructive, feels out of control. There's a lot of black and white thinking. You either win or lose, you have tunnel vision, there's negative consequences, there's guilt and remorse. It's hiding things like shame or sadness. They don't feel safe. Relationships can be lost. Where when you're feeling angry and you express it in a way that is healthy, you can feel empowered and alive, like you have control. You're flexible in your thinking. You look at the bigger picture. You can look at other people's points of views. Boundaries are well defined. You can have differences with other people. There isn't that, there's only one right way, and it allows relationships to be strengthened. Now, when I did this seminar in person, I used the group to go through and think about basically the creating limits of unhealthy versus healthy for each of the 8 core emotions. So that may be something that you consider doing for yourself or doing with your clients. If we don't set those limits, we can push boundaries pretty far. Sometimes we need to have those concrete ways to express. Okay, I'm feeling angry and I want to express it a certain way. Let me think about the list that I've made. Or I responded in a certain way when I was feeling angry, and that fell under the unhealthy anger list that I made. Who do I need to make things right with? And some of the ways to think about that is to talk about what you're feeling and turning it from a negative to a positive. Um, so things like disgusted to surprised, exhausted to recharging, failure to learning, afraid to curious, I hate to I prefer. So those are just some examples of just trying to change the framework of how we view what it is we are going through. Um, there's an ability to, as we think about working with clients and how this is done, um, they might not necessarily know right off the bat how to make that emotional scale, how to look at from unhealthy to healthy. And so sometimes it might be a matter of looking at things in terms of, um, like the smiley face emojis that came about years ago. What are you feeling? Or like when you go to the doctor, if you're hurt, on your scale of 1 to 10, where's your pain? So sometimes having a foundation can be really helpful to help the person create that chart of unhealthy versus healthy. Um, Creating words sometimes, so feeling words. When needs are not being met, what are the feelings that they're feeling? When the needs are being met, what are the feelings that they are feeling? And comparing those to some of the core emotions and the synonyms of those emotions. So we're going to transition a little bit here to ways to teach emotion. And some people might be like, well, why haven't we covered this more from the beginning? Um, and I've thought a lot about this as a clinician and as an instructor. So I've been teaching for over 10 years in counseling courses. I've taught a wide variety of courses. And we spend time talking about theories, we talk about techniques, we talk about assessment and diagnosis. But so much of what people come into our office, they're showing emotion. The nonverbals are emotion. They're talking about how they feel. The standard therapist idea that is often out there is the therapist asking a person, how does that make you feel? And sometimes we joke about that, and but it's really the foundation of some of the things that we need to focus on. We don't have courses on emotion. We may incorporate techniques or um, treatment plans to look at emotion. But when we think about it, we don't sit down and go, okay, here are the emotions. This is what emotions are. Um, we may not know those emotions ourselves. Um, so when we think about what that looks like, um, even in a classroom of therapists at this point, like we would all have different definitions. Some of them might be the same, there might be some overlap, but there's going to be different things that come to mind. Um, and maybe we need to do a better job of thinking about what are concrete definitions and how do we teach those emotions to people. Um, and when we do that, we learn to effectively communicate. We learn to actively listen, to hear what people have to say and what they're feeling, to um, be able to express those in a way that are ways to have people have those needs met. So we're going to spend some time now talking about what those ways are to show those items and how do we know what they are for ourselves. So when we're feeling a certain emotion, we talked about this a little bit. What is that emotion we're feeling? What does it feel like? Where do we feel it? Who has the power in that emotion? How do we become unstuck from that emotion? Then let that emotion fully take over. Is it a wave that kind of comes and goes? Let that emotion be experienced. Don't try to block it. Don't push it away. But at the same time, don't keep it around. Don't harp on it. Don't let it sit there. Don't make it bigger than it has to be. Just pretend you're an outside witness looking to see what that emotion is doing to you. You are not your emotion. So don't act on it right away. You don't feel that way all the time. You have felt different. Describe your emotion by saying, I have the feeling of, rather than saying, I am. What are the other feelings that you're coming across at this time? Sometimes we have to peel away the layers of the onion to determine what it is that a person is feeling. Sometimes at the surface, we think that they're one way. Sometimes they actually have a deeper meaning to them. What need of yours is not being met? Don't judge your emotion. Accept your emotion. Think about the ways that you can express that emotion. So, when we think about how we can teach those emotions, we teach those emotions by helping people understand, recognize, express, and regulate their emotions. We do it by empathizing with our emotions and the emotions of others. We've talked about the emotional regulation. Emotional regulation allows us to label those emotions, to express them in a way that's healthy, to experience what it is and be able to effectively communicate it. Increase your emotional vocabulary. Help increase the vocabulary of others. There are so many times that people will say, I feel a certain way. And then when a person hears that word, they're like, oh, okay, that's gonna fall under this category for me. So that's where the concrete definition comes into place, or learning what more emotional vocabulary words mean to identify how you're feeling more specifically. Using different ways to associate emotional expression and what that means specifically for each person. Some people cry when they're mad, some people cry when they're scared, but they might not be sad. So being aware of what that looks like. Emotional literacy can be really important to do with people, with your clients, with your families. Role play scenarios, tell stories, do mindfulness exercises or group discussions about emotions. Sometimes emotion is considered the big bad wolf. Nobody wants to talk about it, or it's the elephant in the room. So, overall, if we spend more time teaching those emotions and that emotional regulation, we know that it's going to take patience and empathy, and it's going to be a one step forward, two steps back kind of process. But eventually, by more and more people having the knowledge and the skills and the resources to understand and manage their emotions, they're able to empower them and to lead more fulfilling and emotionally resilient lives. And once we have that foundation, we can think about how culture and emotion fit into each other. So, understanding cultural similarities and differences is especially critical to preventing potentially harmful miscommunications. So, on the screen here right now, I have a clip from the show Ted Lasso, which is on Apple TV. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's very good with working through some different emotions. But in this scenario, there is a soccer player that they're having conversations at the end of the game about what each person did wrong or could do better for the next match. And one of the players goes, "Well, I didn't do anything wrong." And so everybody thought, wow, this guy is really rude and out of line. Like, I can't believe he would say something like that. And, in Premier League soccer, you oftentimes have people that are coming from a lot of different cultures. And so the one player goes, um, "Hey, Jan Moss isn't being rude. He's just being Dutch." And I kind of make this joke because for myself, I'm predominantly Dutch, and for me, I don't always notice some things when it comes to um different emotional cues. As I've gotten older, I've realized that the belief that Dutch people can be not very emotional can be extremely true. So again, going back to that emotional spectrum we talked about, it's not always the case of a person having the same spectrum. Different cultures also have different beliefs and social norms for those spectrums as well. Now, our universal emotions that are the same across multiple cultures has to do with the 8 core emotions that we've talked about. Um, Facial expressions are the same across cultures. All cultures experience triggers. What tends to be different across cultures as it relates to emotions has to do with the rules about the expression. What is appropriate and what isn't appropriate? What language is used to describe those emotions? And what are the attitudes towards those emotions? So sometimes when we're doing our great active listening, we can be curious to find out what it is for a person's culture specifically to understand what those emotions are. Emotions do vary across cultures in those ways, um, based on norms, beliefs, values, the socialization. They all help shape how a person experiences and expresses those emotions. In some cultures, there might be different facial expressions through body language, the vocal tone, or the gestures that they make. Some cultures are much more overt and expressive of those emotions, while other cultures might not show a lot of nonverbals when it comes to the display of emotion. There could be different emotional display rules. So, what locations and contexts and situations might be the expression of emotions appropriate? The emotional valence. So, the perceived positivity or negativity of emotion can vary across cultures. They may differ in how they interpret the emotion. The labels and vocabulary used in different cultures. So different words or phrases or concepts can be done. There might be different cultural syndromes where they exhibit patterns of emotional experience. In different cultures like Malaysia or Japan, there are unique combinations of emotional, cognitive, and behavioral symptoms. There are different socialization practices. Cultural norms, parenting practices are transmitted from one generation to the next. Parents and caregivers play a significant role in teaching children how to recognize, regulate, and express emotion. Religious and spiritual beliefs shape how a person experiences and copes. Some religious practices include rituals, ceremonies, or prayer for processing and expressing emotion. Cultures are often dimensional as well. There might be an individualism, collectivism. There could be power distance or uncertainty avoidance, and those can influence the emotional expression and regulation. For example, a culture that is high in collectivism might prioritize harmony and interdependence, leading to greater emphasis on emotional restraint and conformity. Gender roles play a significant influence in how emotions are expressed in different cultures. And we're going to touch base on that shortly as well. How cultures change and the use of globalization, migration, and exposure to different cultures in today's day and age. Cultures have become more interconnected and can be greater cross cultural expressions or hybridization of different emotional norms and practices. Overall, it's important to focus on promoting cultural competency, empathy, and effective communication across different diverse cultural contexts. Recognizing and respecting that cultural differences in emotional expression and experience can help foster meaningful and mutual relationships. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about some of those gender roles as they come in terms of male versus female emotion. So, emotional stereotypes. This image represents a pretty typical one that says, men tend to be more emotional in their thought process and using their brain to make decisions, where women tend to be more focused on decisions of the heart and emotions of the heart. Um, these gender viewpoints can be based on biological, physiological, social, and different cultural norms. A lot of times people will say that there's this idea that, men shouldn't cry, or that a man is weak if he cries or is vulnerable in his talking about emotions. There are situations where if a woman is more firm in her expression of emotions, that she might be stereotyped as not being very nice, and get judged and given not so nice names provided to her. Um, as we think about men and women in their roles of how they've learned about emotion and how they process emotion, we're really focusing on the life that they grew up in the context in which gender was displayed to them. So when we think about socialization and gender roles, we start off at a very young age. Um, Girls and boys are socialized differently about how to handle things. Um, for example, girls may be encouraged to be more nurturing, empathetic, and it might be acceptable to express sadness, while boys might be socialized to suppress more vulnerability and display emotions such as anger and aggression. There are some biological and hormonal factors that come into place when we look at the difference of emotions between men and women. Hormone fluctuations, such as those associated with menstruation or testosterone, may contribute to the differences in the way a person reacts and does mood regulation. We've seen with the neurology studies that there are brain differences structurally and functionally between brains of men and women, and this can impact their ability to have emotional processing. Females tend to have a larger and more connected corpus callosum, which facilitates greater interhemispheric communication and emotional integration. Coping strategies in terms of how they problem solve. Men and women seek different ways in their responses to stress and emotional challenges. Women tend to seek more emotional social support, where men tend to be more inclined to be more problem focused and avoidant of other people. Emotional regulation. There are some research that suggests that females are more proficient in recognizing and interpreting emotion of others. And that is because they are viewed to have a greater sensitivity to those emotional cues. As we talked about with the emotional spectrum, emotional intensity is varied amongst men and women. Um, there can be different intensity levels that a person experiences. The social expectations, which often is a very large one as we're talking about judgment, is that what is considered appropriate or quote unquote normal for their gender. Then there is the cultural variation of men and women's roles, shaping gender differences, the cultures as they relate to family dynamics and societal expectations. Overall, when it comes to gender differences between men and women, we might notice observable differences in expression. However, it's essential to recognize that these differences are complex and multifaceted. They're influenced by a range of biological, psychological, social, and cultural factors. Additionally, individual differences within each gender group are significant, and not all individuals conform to traditional gender stereotypes or norms. There are two bigger areas left that I plan to cover as we discuss emotion. We've talked about how do we define it, what are the synonyms of it, how do we teach it, what can be healthy and unhealthy, how there's differences amongst cultures and gender. And there's two more areas that I think are really significant to focus on in this complex matrix of understanding emotions. We're going to spend time looking and discussing at the role that emotion plays across the lifespan. And we're also going to spend some time looking at the role of emotion in the different types of relationships that we have. And as we look at those roles of emotion, expression of emotion across the lifespan, we're going to get into some of the aspects of what we call emotional intelligence and what the components of emotional intelligence look like. So, across the lifespan, we learn as early as birth about what emotion is. You know, babies cry, they can't use words, they use that emotion and their nonverbal cues to tell us how they're feeling. The caregiver role in this time span is extremely important to providing responsive caregiving so that there are different beliefs about one's self-esteem, um, their needs being met. So this is the main foundation of where emotions are starting to be learned, and more so in if I express emotion, what will I get from it? As we move into those toddler and early childhood years, children begin to learn how to label and express those emotions. And as they do that, the response that they get to that expression of emotion shows them what are their coping strategies, what is good in terms of messages that they're told and how to respond and if they should exhibit those different emotions. As we get into middle childhood, the child begins to have their brain developing more complexly so they can understand some of the interplay between their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. This is when they can start to have some of that emotional regulation. They may not fully be able to dissect the level of emotion, but based on the experiences that they're having with the people in their lives, they're able to see what they get out of the expression of their emotions. And that continues into adolescence. As we know, with adolescence, we start to see um, more the ability to process consequences. And so social emotions such as embarrassment and shame and guilt start to come out. And so lots of negativity as it relates to emotion is taking place here. And this is really an important, crucial time to understand emotional regulation and the ability to communicate emotions and to have good listening. As we get into adulthood, and the brain continues to develop, and we start to create our own individual identity, um, life experiences that we've had growing up, decisions we make as an adults, that emotional regulation becomes really important here. We're able to fully process emotions and the consequences of those emotions and make decisions based on those emotions. And that's where, as we'll talk about emotional intelligence in a minute, the importance of that emotional intelligence for the use of emotional regulation is really crucial. As we get to the older stages of life, emotional regulation can become pretty complex again, as people start to focus on the meaning and purpose of their life. Um, Maybe having some regret, maybe having some pride. And so there's this whole reflection piece that is taking place. Um, and also trying to be mindful of the stage that people are going through, and doing that good active listening during this portion. So as we go through that lifespan, we see the different aspects of how we express emotion. We express emotion by talking, by listening, our facial expressions, using all of our different senses. They really play a large role how we communicate our emotions. I feel happy, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm grateful. We have facial expressions, smiling, scared, crying, raising eyebrows. We have body language, different gestures or movements, open body language, relaxed body language, our tone of voice, how we change the pitch and the volume, speaking softly and gently or being firm and loud. We can also use our artistic expression to share our emotion, especially as it looks at means of communicating with others. We have the ability of showing physical contact to express emotions, hugging, holding hands, showing comfort and support. Active listening, as we've talked about, is important to understand and validate other people's emotions. There are different cultural rituals and traditions, as we've learned, to pay attention to, ways to express those emotions of gratitude, sense of belonging, and connection. It's important to focus on mindfulness and self reflection and seek professional support as needed to be able to deal with intense or complex or challenging or overwhelming emotions that a person is feeling, because oftentimes those emotions feel lots of different things in our body: muscle tension, headaches, depression, digestive problems, fatigue, sleep disturbances, weakened immune systems, changes in appetite, skin issues, increased heart rate or blood pressure. So, as we think about those emotional needs and how they get met throughout a person's lifespan, it is important to focus on this emotional pyramid of needs. As a young child into adulthood, we have needs that need to be met. We often will focus on them in terms of our basic needs like food, water, and shelter. Sometimes we focus on them in terms of our understanding and our ability to be self-aware. So if we take this emotional pyramid of needs and we start off with the idea of having gentle acceptance. So under this, people have feelings of anxiety, hopelessness, grief is expected. The acceptance is a prerequisite for positive change. So, as we think about the emotion that we're going through, as we talked about with emotional regulation, acceptance is always the first piece. We need to have compassion. So during these unprecedented times, it's important to have forgiveness, flexibility, compassion for yourself and for other people. This can help alleviate that anxiety and the burden of that feeling. Then it can get into the opportunity to have a routine. That routine provides a sense of order. It's the glue that holds us together from day to day. When we're faced with things that are unfamiliar, we fill those gaps with things like fear. Instead, we can fill them with things that are comfortable to us. Healthy routines allow us to not have to have those gaps. Things like sleep, exercise, eating. Our bodies and minds are so interconnected with our physical health that we need to be able to have a routine to keep it safe. Next on the pyramid is connection. The physical distancing is not synonymous with being away from people from a social perspective. Connection is extremely important. Having relationships, especially if you're feeling lonely, needs to be done no matter what. Courage is where the research has showed us a radical acceptance of our emotions. Even when we have messy or complicated emotions, this is where resiliency comes through, thriving and having happiness. So, the importance of slowing down and facing difficult emotions with courage. That is where you will be able to make better decisions and have your values reflected in your decisions. Sometimes we need to reset. We need to have that time of reflection. Where are our priorities? Are we doing things that are no longer as important? What part of our normal routine do we not want to have to rush back into? Gather and reflect and learn about yourself on what matters most. And this will lead to the aspect of wisdom, the part where life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. The only certainty is uncertainty. And once we realize that truth, the healthier and more authentically happier we will be. We don't know. Even when we think that we know, okay, here's my plan of the day, anything can happen. So when we worry about not having control or not knowing what's going to happen, we let that fear creep in. But accepting that uncertainty is there, having that routine to minimize that uncertainty will really make a huge difference in the ability to process and understand those emotions. And sometimes we need to process those emotions and be aware of them in terms of thinking about things like using this mood meter. How are we feeling with our energy? Are we unpleasant or pleasant? Sometimes when we're trying to process where we are at in the scheme of things, it can be easy to use different charts like these because even if we have a large emotional vocabulary, sometimes we don't know how those words fit together. So if we find a emotional mood meter that we can follow, it can help us in that regulation and get to the wisdom part of that pyramid. Different feeling charts can help you identify those emotions and manage those feelings. Smiley faces, the degrees of emotion, the mood meter. Like you can go on Google or Pinterest or Etsy, Amazon, any of them. You can make your own and find ways to have something that can help you concrete be able to define what those emotions are. Sometimes it can be helpful in that we use the rain activity earlier for emotional regulation. Other people like to use the idea of the ruler. So recognizing the emotion, understanding it, labeling it, expressing it, regulating it. We kind of been going over some of this stuff a little bit more repetitively now because these things are so important to the understanding and the expression of those emotions. And when we can understand and express those emotions, we are able to have a level of emotional intelligence. So, what does emotional intelligence look like? It's awareness of your own internal world, your emotions, your beliefs, and your values. It's demonstrating awareness and empathy for the people in your life's experiences. It's recognizing how your upbringing or previous relationships or experiences impact your current relationships. It's the willingness to be open and honest about your feelings and experiences. Don't worry about, oh, I got to say this and do this to fit in with this person. And I got to do this and say this to fit in with another person. At the end of the day, you're just exhausting yourself. Be who you are, because when you are who you are, you will know who is truly meant to be in your life. Using triggers and understanding them to be able to help you build regulation skills to calm down. Be open-minded to think about other people and what they're going through. Have patience and grace in those active listening moments. Have the skills by practicing and being active listeners and good communicators to have hard conversations. Allow for intimacy and closeness when working through fears and being vulnerable. Being sensitive to you and the person you're talking with. And that knowing that perfection isn't a prerequisite for giving or receiving love. There are a couple different viewpoints or theories as we look at emotional intelligence. One of the emotional intelligence models looks at the ability to perceive, evaluate, and express emotions accurately, the ability to access emotions to support that cognition, the ability to understand emotional messages and to make use of that emotional information, and the ability to regulate those emotions to promote well-being. Another model looks at the focus of having good self-awareness, understanding one's own emotions, self-assessment, self-confidence, having social awareness, the ability to be empathetic, organizational, and provide service. Looking at self-management, so emotional self-control, transparency, adaptability, initiative, and optimism. Relationship management, so the influence of inspirational leadership, developing others, being a change catalyst, focusing on conflict management, and collaboration. So, emotional intelligence is kind of the big picture of understanding the emotion, using emotional regulation, understanding how emotion fits across the lifespan in cultures, in gender roles, what's healthy, what's unhealthy. And so, as we have all of these pieces kind of put together now, it's kind of like, all right, what about emotion and all the hats that I wear, all the emotion and the relationships that I have. And so it's important to look at how emotion relates to the different dynamics in our life. When we have emotional relationships with our family, this refers to the emotions experienced and expressed within the context of family relationships. These are influenced by different dynamics, interactions, and bonds. These can encompass a wide range of feelings and experiences that can shape the quality of the family dynamic and contribute to the overall emotional climate within the family. Examples of experiences for emotions that fit within the family. Things like love and affection. What happens when there's conflict and anger? The importance of support and empathy, trust and security, joy and celebration. How you handle things like grief and loss, boundaries and autonomy, and how to be able to have good communication and connection. Overall, family relationships are very complicated. There's lots of emotions, experiences, and dynamics that take place within a family unit. Being able to cultivate a positive family relationship involves fostering love, support, and communication and resilience among family members, promoting the overall well being and harmony within the family. Emotions at work. This one might get a little feisty for some people or cause a little some of those reactions. For other people, they absolutely love their job and they don't even consider they're working because it's such a great place. Work relation emotion often is related to the context as what's going on between colleagues, supervisors, and individuals that work in that environment. There can be a wide range of feelings and experiences within this dynamic. We're focusing on things like collaboration and teamwork, the role of a leadership and the support that they provide. What happens when there's conflict and tension? How do you establish trust and respect? Making sure that there's good job satisfaction, engagement, communication being provided, and feedback being elicited. A recognition and appreciation at a workplace, having work life balance. Overall, the work relational emotion encompasses lots of different feelings based on the interaction and the climate of the organization. Cultivating positive work relation emotion involves fostering collaboration, support, communication, and respect among coworkers, thereby promoting the overall well-being and productivity within a workplace. Our emotions with our friends. This friend relational emotion is often experienced by the dynamics and interactions between friends. There's lots of different feelings that take place within this climate of relationships. These tend to be some of our closest and most connected relationships. There's often a lot of trust and reliability, empathy, understanding, shared experiences, and memory. However, sometimes there needs to be conflict resolution that can be accomplished through good communication and openness. Friends provide a lot of support and encouragement. They often respect boundaries and autonomy. They're full of fun and enjoyment, and they can be very stable and long lasting types of relationships. These relationships are crucial to cultivating closeness with trust, communication, support, and mutual respect amongst friends. Our romantic relationships are often experienced by looking at different feelings that shape the quality of the romantic relationship. The importance of love and intimacy, trust and vulnerability, communication and understanding, passion and romance, the ability to have conflict resolution, to have shared goals and values, commitment and longevity, and to be able to have fun and enjoyment and still have a level of respect for autonomy and individuality. Cultivating positive romantic relationships involves fostering love, trust, communication, support, and mutual respect between both people. And that promotes an overall well being and satisfaction within the relationship. Our relationship with ourself focuses on individual experiences, focusing on our own thoughts, actions, and self perceptions. These are directed inwardly and influenced by one's self awareness, self concept, and self evaluation. Emotions are significant in shaping self esteem, the ability to self regulate, and an overall self well being. When we think about words like self evaluation, we're looking at our behavior, our accomplishments, and our characteristics. Our self awareness looks at our certain levels to reflect on our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. Our self esteem is tied to how we feel about ourselves as our worth and value of a person as it relates to feelings of possible inadequacy or unworthiness. The ability to self regulate is how we can manage our own emotions, as we've been discussing. Our self identity is important to provide perceptions of ourselves and our identities to the people around us so that we are not changing who we are every time someone new walks in a room. Our social comparisons are based upon the people who are around us, our friends, our family, our coworkers. Our ability to manage emotions such as envy, jealousy, and pride. To have self-compassion when looking at our ability to understand emotion, face challenges and setbacks. Our self-reflection and growth looks at the ability to provide opportunities to grow when things such as regret or disappointments take place. Overall, self-regulation emotions are an important aspect of emotional experiences and self-awareness. Cultivating that self-awareness, self-compassion, and positive self-relational emotions can enhance one's resilience, self-esteem, and personal growth. Our relationship with children is often expressed in how we teach children what emotions are. There's lots of dynamics that can take place. We can form attachments and bonding with children, characterized by primary caregivers, secure attachments, fostering feelings of trust, security, and emotional connection, teaching children how to be able to emotionally regulate, having empathy and perspective when dealing with children, being able to show them properly socialization and peer relationship types of experiences, having effective communication between parents and children to provide that positive parent-child relationship, sibling relationships, significant roles in shaping social skills, emotional regulation, companionship, and communication. The overall family dynamic and environment is often influenced by the parenting styles, the family structure, and the cultural values. Children's relationships at school and with peer groups extends to thinking about teacher-student relationships and opportunities to be part of a peer collaboration. And then coping in those different transitions and challenges. Children go through many different challenges and transitions throughout the course of their childhood. Having supportive relationships with caregivers and peers provides a buffer against adversity and provides fostering the ability to get resilience and adaptive coping skills. We also think about the role of emotions with our sexual relationships. The relationship between emotion and sex is complex and multifaceted. It varies greatly among individuals and can be influenced by culture, psychological, and biological factors. There are different emotions that come into play as we think about sexual relationships. The role of desire and arousal, desire such as love, attraction, many people feeling emotionally connected to a person they're having sexual relationships with. The importance of intimacy, the emotional and trust, the bonding, and how those are linked to sexual satisfaction and fulfillment. Feeling emotionally close to a person can enhance the quality of a sexual interaction. The vulnerability that comes from being sexual can evoke a range of emotions. Insecurity, anxiety, emotional barriers, or unresolved issues can interfere with sexual expression and the ability to enjoy. Stress and mood can impact the levels of anxiety and depression and the importance of sexual desire and performance. High levels of stress and negative emotions decrease one's libido, while positive emotions can enhance sexual desire. Communication as the importance of emotions and desires for a healthy sexual relationship. Effective communication can strengthen those emotional bonds and lead to more satisfying sexual experiences. The cultural and social influences, societal attitudes, and personal beliefs about sex and emotions can shape a person's individual experiences about sexuality. Attachment styles strongly suggest an individual's early experience with their caregivers shape their ability to have adult attachment, which influences their intimate relationships and sexual behaviors. Secure attachment is associated with a healthier emotional bond and a more satisfying sexual relationship. We also have the role of emotions, but of emotions in the hormones. Biological factors include hormonal fluctuations that impact both emotion and sexual desire. Hormones such as testosterone, estrogen, and oxytocin play important roles in regulating sexual function and emotional responses. The relationship between emotion and sex is intricative and dynamic, with emotions influencing sexual experiences and behaviors, sexual experiences impacting emotional well being and relationship satisfaction, building trust and emotional intimacy, and maintaining open communication are essential for cultivating healthy and fulfilling secure relationships. In conclusion, it is important to think about emotional intelligence. The re-engaging of emotion in an emotionally confusing world is a concept that highlights the importance of understanding and managing emotions in today's complex and rapidly changing world. Emotional intelligence refers to the ability to recognize, understand, and regulate one's own emotion, as well as empathize it and influence it to the emotions of others. In an emotionally confusing world where individuals are often bombarded with information, faced with uncertainty, and navigating diverse social interactions, emotional intelligence becomes increasingly valuable. In a world of complicated and confusing emotions, we want to focus on these final things. Self-awareness. Emotional intelligence starts with self-awareness. As we've talked about, being in tune with your own emotions, recognizing your triggers, and understanding how emotions influence thoughts, decisions, and behaviors. Being able to have this self-awareness will help you navigate complex situations with clarity and composure. Self-regulation. Emotional intelligence involves the ability to regulate and manage one's emotions effectively. This includes coping with stress, controlling impulses, and maintaining a balanced perspective in challenging circumstances. In this emotionally confusing world, self-regulation enables individuals to stay grounded and resilient amid chaos and uncertainty. Empathy. Empathy is a key component of emotional intelligence, involving the ability of understanding and sharing of feelings with others. In a world where diverse perspectives and experiences collide, empathy fosters connection, collaboration, and effective communication. It helps individuals navigate social interactions with sensitivity and understanding. Social skills. Emotional intelligence encompasses the range of social skills, including communication, conflict resolution, and leadership. Having strong social skills enables individuals to build and maintain positive relationships, navigate conflicts constructively, and inspire others towards common goals. Adaptability. It's important that individuals adapt to change and navigate uncertainty with agility. In a world characterized by rapid change and unpredictability, adaptability is essential for thriving in diverse personal and professional contexts. Resilience. Emotional intelligence fosters resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks, overcome adversity, and maintain a positive outlook in the face of challenges. In an emotionally confusing world, resilience enables individuals to persevere through difficult times and emerge stronger and more resourceful. Overall, having emotional intelligence, understanding emotions, what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what is positive and what is negative, can provide a framework for re-engaging with emotion in this emotionally confusing world. This will help you and individuals to navigate complexity, cultivate meaningful relationships, and thrive amidst uncertainty and change. By developing and understanding emotion, individuals can enhance their well-being, their effectiveness, and their fulfillment in all aspects of life. I appreciate you taking the time and joining and listening to this webinar today. Please, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out and contact me. Thank you and have a great day.